The morning briefing room at Naval Base Coronado buzzed with tension as Captain Jake Morrison surveyed the assembled team. 12 elite Navy SEALs sat at attention, their weathered faces reflecting years of dangerous missions across hostile territories. The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across the room as Morrison placed a classified folder on the podium. "Gentlemen, we have a situation developing in the South China Sea," Morrison began, his voice carrying the weight of authority earned through countless operations. "Intelligence suggests a high-value target is being held on a heavily fortified island. Standard extraction protocols won't work here." He paused, letting the gravity sink in. "This mission requires someone who can pilot a helicopter through hostile airspace, perform precision maneuvers under fire, and extract our team while enemy forces close in." The room fell silent. These were men who had rappelled from burning helicopters, swum through shark-infested waters, and infiltrated terrorist compounds. Yet the complexity of this particular mission gave them pause. The target location sat 60 miles offshore, surrounded by anti-aircraft installations and patrol boats. Weather reports indicated severe storm conditions would complicate any aerial approach. Morrison's eyes scanned the room, searching for any sign of specialized aviation experience among his team. "This isn't just about flying a bird from point A to point B," he continued. "We need someone who's flown combat missions, someone who knows how to handle a chopper when everything goes sideways." His voice carried a note of urgency that hadn't been there moments before. "Any experienced war pilots here?" The silence stretched on, becoming uncomfortable. Several SEALs exchanged glances, their minds racing through the names of pilots they'd worked with in the past. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez had logged hundreds of hours in transport aircraft, but helicopters were a different beast entirely. Petty Officer Chen had some civilian flight training, but nothing that would prepare him for this level of complexity. Then, from the back corner of the room, a figure began to rise. The movement was calm, deliberate, without any of the bravado that might have been expected in such a moment. Every head turned as the person stood, and collective surprise rippled through the assembled SEALs. It was Lieutenant Sarah Chen, the team's intelligence analyst, a woman whose quiet competence had earned respect, but who had never mentioned any aviation background. Sarah was 32 years old, with short black hair and intelligent brown eyes that seemed to take in everything around her. She had joined the team 18 months earlier, quickly proving herself invaluable in mission planning and tactical analysis. Her reports were thorough, her insights sharp, and her demeanor professional. But flying combat helicopters? No one had seen that coming. "Ma'am," Morrison said, his eyebrows raised in genuine surprise. The captain had worked with Sarah on dozens of operations, relying on her analytical skills and attention to detail. She had never once mentioned any flight experience, let alone combat aviation. Sarah stood perfectly still for a moment, her expression unreadable. The room waited in complete silence as she seemed to weigh her words carefully. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady and confident, carrying none of the hesitation one might expect from someone about to make such a revelation. "Sir, I have the experience you're looking for." Her words cut through the silence like a blade. "Apache attack helicopter, 2 tours in Afghanistan, 1 in Iraq, 347 combat flight hours, including precision extractions under fire." She paused, allowing the information to register. "I can get your team in and out." The transformation in the room was immediate and palpable. The same men who had been searching their memories for pilot contacts were now staring at their mild-mannered intelligence analyst with a mixture of shock, respect, and curiosity. How had someone with such extensive combat aviation experience ended up behind a desk, analyzing satellite imagery and radio intercepts? Morrison found himself momentarily speechless. In all his years of military service, he had rarely encountered such a surprise. Sarah Chen, who had spent the last year and a half quietly supporting their missions from behind the scenes, was revealing herself to be exactly the asset they needed for their most challenging operation yet. "Lieutenant Chen," Morrison finally managed, his voice carrying a new note of respect. "Would you mind elaborating on your background? This is unexpected." Sarah's expression remained calm, professional. She had clearly been preparing for this moment. Perhaps knowing that eventually her past would intersect with her present, in exactly this way. The room full of elite operators waited for her explanation. Their earlier concerns about the mission suddenly replaced by intense curiosity about the woman they thought they knew. "Of course, sir," Sarah replied simply. "But perhaps we should discuss the mission parameters first. Time seems to be a factor here, and I'll need to understand the full scope of what you're asking before I can commit to the operation." Her response demonstrated the same analytical approach that had made her invaluable as an intelligence officer, but now the SEALs were seeing it through a completely different lens. This wasn't just someone who could read satellite photos and decode enemy communications. This was someone who had flown into hostile territory, faced enemy fire, and brought soldiers home alive. The mission briefing was about to take on an entirely new dimension, and everyone in that room knew it. Captain Morrison looked at his team with fresh eyes, wondering what other surprises might emerge as they planned what was shaping up to be one of their most complex operations yet. Captain Morrison gestured toward the classified folder, his demeanor shifting from surprised to intensely focused. "Very well, Lieutenant. Let's discuss the specifics." He activated the wall-mounted display, revealing satellite imagery of a heavily fortified island compound surrounded by churning dark waters. "The target is Colonel Marcus Webb, a former Delta Force operator who went rogue 6 months ago," Morrison explained, his voice taking on the clipped tones of a professional briefing. "Intelligence indicates he's being held in this facility." The image zoomed in, showing concrete bunkers, guard towers, and what appeared to be a small helicopter landing pad. "The problem is getting there and back alive." Sarah moved closer to the display, her trained eyes immediately picking up details that others might miss. She studied the compound's layout, the positioning of the defensive structures, and the narrow landing area that would serve as their extraction point. Her mind was already calculating approach vectors, considering weather patterns, and identifying potential complications. "What's our window?" she asked, her voice maintaining the same professional calm that had characterized her intelligence briefings. But now the SEALs were listening with new attention, recognizing the questions of someone who had planned and executed similar missions before. 48 hours, Morrison replied. "After that, intelligence suggests Webb will be moved to a location we can't reach." He pulled up additional imagery, showing the surrounding area. The compound sits on a rocky outcrop, surrounded by patrol boats and equipped with surface-to-air missiles. Weather reports indicate storm conditions with 40-knot winds and limited visibility. The assembled SEALs exchanged glances. Even for elite operators, this represented significant challenges. The combination of hostile forces, difficult terrain, and severe weather conditions would test every aspect of their training and experience. Sarah continued studying the images, her expression thoughtful. "What aircraft are we looking at?" she asked. "And what's the support package?" "We have access to a modified Black Hawk," Morrison answered. "Extended-range fuel tanks, defensive countermeasures, and upgraded avionics. But you'll be flying alone. We can't risk a larger package that might trigger their early warning systems." "Understood," Sarah nodded. "What about the extraction team, composition, and equipment?" Staff Sergeant Rodriguez leaned forward, his curiosity getting the better of him. "Ma'am, if you don't mind me asking, how does someone go from flying Apaches in combat zones to analyzing intelligence reports in San Diego?" Sarah turned to face the room full of operators, and for the first time since standing up, she allowed a slight smile to cross her face. "It's a reasonable question, Sergeant. The short answer is that sometimes life takes unexpected turns." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "I flew with the 1st Attack Reconnaissance Battalion out of Fort Riley. 2 tours in Afghanistan, mostly convoy, escort, and close air support missions. In Iraq, I was part of the operation that cleared insurgents from the Sunni Triangle." Her voice carried the matter-of-fact tone of someone recounting professional accomplishments, rather than boasting about heroic deeds. "During my 2nd deployment in Afghanistan, our forward operating base came under coordinated attack. Enemy forces had positioned themselves in the surrounding hills, using the terrain to mask their approach." Sarah's eyes focused on something beyond the room, remembering details that had been burned into her memory. We had soldiers pinned down in 3 different locations, with no way for ground forces to reach them. The room had gone completely quiet. Even Morrison found himself leaning forward, drawn into the story despite his need to maintain professional distance. I flew 6 sorties that day, Sarah continued. The weather was marginal, visibility was limited, and enemy forces had man-portable surface-to-air missiles. On the 3rd extraction, we took an RPG hit that damaged our tail rotor. I had to auto-rotate into a landing zone that was basically a parking lot surrounded by buildings, with wounded soldiers depending on us to get them out. Petty Officer Williams, a demolitions expert with 8 years of SEAL experience, shook his head in appreciation. How many soldiers did you extract? 14 wounded, plus the crew of a disabled Bradley fighting vehicle, Sarah replied simply. The auto-rotation landing worked, but we were stuck until a recovery team could reach us. That meant holding the position for 6 hours, while enemy forces tried to overrun our location. The picture was becoming clearer for the assembled team. This wasn't just someone who had logged flight hours in comfortable conditions. Sarah Chen had proven herself under the worst possible circumstances, demonstrating exactly the kind of skills and composure they would need for the current mission. So what brought you to intelligence work? Morrison asked, his tone reflecting both professional interest and personal curiosity. Sarah's expression grew more serious. The Army decided that my skills might be better utilized in analysis and planning, rather than direct combat operations. After 7 years of flying, they offered me an opportunity to transition to intelligence work. She paused, her voice taking on a slightly different quality. Sometimes the military decides that experienced operators can serve the mission better in supporting roles. The implication wasn't lost on anyone in the room. The military had a way of moving skilled personnel where they were most needed, regardless of personal preferences. Sarah's transition from combat pilot to intelligence analyst hadn't necessarily been her choice. Well, Morrison said, his voice carrying a note of satisfaction. It looks like your previous experience is exactly what we need now. He turned back to the display, showing the target compound. Are you willing to take on this mission, Lieutenant? I won't sugarcoat it. This is going to be dangerous, even by our standards. Sarah studied the satellite imagery one more time, her mind running through calculations and scenarios. The assembled SEALs watched her process the information, recognizing the careful analysis of someone who understood the risks involved. Sir, I'll need detailed weather forecasts, enemy force disposition, and technical specifications on the Black Hawk modifications, she said finally. But yes, I can get your team in and out. The question is whether you're prepared to trust someone you didn't know was a pilot until 5 minutes ago. Morrison looked around the room at his team. These were men who had learned to trust each other through shared danger and mutual dependence. Now they were being asked to extend that trust to someone whose capabilities they were just discovering. I think, Morrison said slowly, that we're about to find out just how much we don't know about the people we work with every day. The next 24 hours transformed Naval Base Coronado into a hub of intense activity. While the SEAL team prepared their equipment and refined mission protocols, Sarah Chen found herself back in her element for the first time in 18 months. The base's helicopter maintenance hangar became her temporary office as she conducted detailed inspections of the modified Black Hawk that would carry them into hostile territory. Chief Warrant Officer Tom Bradley, the base's senior helicopter mechanic, watched with professional interest as Sarah crawled beneath the aircraft, examining every system with the thoroughness of someone whose life would depend on the machine's reliability. Her questions about engine specifications, fuel consumption rates, and defensive systems demonstrated a depth of knowledge that surprised even the experienced mechanic. Most pilots just kick the tires and check the fuel gauge, Bradley commented, wiping grease from his hands. You're going through this bird like you're planning to rebuild it from scratch. Sarah emerged from beneath the helicopter, oil stains on her uniform that marked her transition from desk-bound analyst back to operational pilot. In Afghanistan, we lost 3 aircraft to mechanical failures that could have been prevented with better pre-flight inspections, she explained matter-of-factly. 1. I learned to trust my own examination over anyone else's maintenance logs. Her meticulous approach extended beyond the helicopter itself. Sarah spent hours studying weather patterns, ocean current data, and intelligence reports about enemy force dispositions around the target island. The same analytical skills that had made her an effective intelligence officer were now being applied to flight planning and mission preparation. Meanwhile, the SEAL team was discovering that having an experienced combat pilot as part of their planning process changed everything about mission preparation. During the afternoon briefing session, Sarah's questions and suggestions revealed gaps in their initial approach that could have proven fatal. Your insertion timeline assumes optimal flight conditions, Sarah pointed out, studying the mission timeline displayed on the briefing room wall. But if we encounter the forecasted weather system, we'll need an additional 15 minutes for the approach, which puts us on target during the guard shift change. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez nodded appreciatively. We hadn't factored that into the calculation. What do you recommend? 1. We adjust the departure time and plan for multiple approach options, Sarah replied, moving to the map display. If conditions are favorable, we use the direct route. If weather forces us to take a longer approach, we have contingency plans that account for the delay. Her suggestions weren't limited to flight planning. Sarah's combat experience had taught her to think about extraction scenarios from both the pilot's perspective and the ground team's needs. She recommended modifications to the team's equipment loadout, suggested alternative communication protocols, and identified potential complications that others had missed. Petty Officer Chen, who shared Sarah's surname but no family relationship, found himself impressed by her attention to detail. Ma'am, you're thinking about aspects of this mission that we hadn't even considered. How do you keep track of all these variables? Sarah looked up from the tactical map where she had been marking potential landing zones. When you're flying into hostile territory, everything matters. Wind direction affects your approach angle. Enemy patrol schedules determine your timing. Equipment weight influences your fuel consumption. Miss any one detail, and people die. Her words carried the weight of experience rather than bravado. The SEALs were beginning to understand that they weren't just gaining a pilot for this mission. They were adding someone whose combat experience complemented their own in unexpected ways. Captain Morrison observed these interactions with growing confidence in his decision to approve Sarah's involvement, but he also recognized that transitioning back to operational status after 18 months behind a desk wouldn't be without challenges. Lieutenant Chen, when was your last flight? Morrison asked during a brief pause in the planning session. Sarah's answer was immediate and precise. 17 months, 2 weeks, and 3 days ago. A training flight at Fort Rucker before my transition to intelligence work. She paused, acknowledging the implication of the question. I know what you're thinking, sir. And you're right to be concerned. The room fell quiet as everyone processed this information. 17 months was a significant gap in flight experience, especially for someone who would be undertaking such a challenging mission. However, Sarah continued, I've maintained my flight qualifications through simulator training every quarter. I've logged 42 hours of simulator time in the past 18 months, including combat scenario training. She pulled out a folder that contained her training records. I also requested additional helicopter training during my last qualification cycle specifically because I wanted to stay current. Morrison reviewed the training records, noting the consistently high scores and the complexity of the scenarios Sarah had practiced. The simulator training was comprehensive, but everyone in the room knew that simulated flight was different from actual flight, especially under combat conditions. There's something else, Sarah said, her voice taking on a more personal tone. I need you all to understand why I transitioned to intelligence work, because it affects how I approach this mission. The team's attention focused completely on her. They had been curious about her background since the previous day's revelation, but had respected her privacy regarding personal details. During my last deployment in Afghanistan, my squadron was tasked with supporting a special operations mission similar to this one, Sarah began. Intelligence was faulty. Weather conditions were worse than forecasted. The enemy had surface-to-air capabilities that hadn't been reported. She paused, her expression reflecting the weight of difficult memories. We lost 2 aircraft and 6 crew members because someone in the intelligence chain made assumptions instead of verifying facts. I realized that the best pilots in the world can't overcome bad intelligence. The connection became clear to everyone in the room. Sarah's transition to intelligence work hadn't been a retreat from dangerous assignments. It had been a strategic decision to address problems at their source. That's why I requested the intelligence position, Sarah continued. I wanted to make sure that pilots and ground teams had the best possible information before they undertook dangerous missions. I've spent 18 months learning how intelligence operations work, how information gets processed and analyzed, and where mistakes typically occur. Morrison leaned back in his chair, processing this new information. So you're not just a pilot who became an analyst. You're someone who understands both sides of the operation. Exactly, sir, Sarah confirmed, which means I can spot potential problems that others might miss, and I can plan for contingencies based on my experience with how missions actually unfold versus how they're supposed to unfold. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez spoke up from across the room. Ma'am, that actually makes me feel better about this whole thing. We're not just getting a pilot who's been out of practice. We're getting someone who's spent 18 months studying exactly the kind of intelligence failures that could compromise missions like this one. The mood in the room shifted perceptibly. What had been concern about Sarah's readiness was transforming into confidence in her unique qualifications. She wasn't just returning to familiar work. She was bringing new skills and perspectives that could enhance the mission's chances of success. All right, Morrison said, standing up and moving to the mission timeline display. Let's finalize our preparations. We launch in 18 hours, which gives us time for a final equipment check and mission rehearsal. He turned to Sarah. Lieutenant, I want you to take the Black Hawk up for a test flight this afternoon. Nothing fancy, just enough to make sure you're comfortable with the controls and the modifications. Sarah nodded. Understood, sir. I'd also like to run through some emergency scenarios with the team, so everyone knows how to respond if we encounter unexpected situations during the mission. As the briefing concluded, and team members dispersed to their individual preparations, Morrison found himself reflecting on the unexpected turns that had brought them to this point. 24 hours earlier, he had been worried about finding a qualified pilot for an extremely dangerous mission. Now he was confident that they had not just found a pilot, but discovered a team member whose unique combination of skills might be exactly what they needed to bring everyone home alive. The test flight that afternoon revealed both the extent of Sarah's skills and the challenges that 18 months away from active flying had created. As the modified Black Hawk lifted off from the base's landing pad, Chief Warrant Officer Bradley watched from the control tower with professional interest. Sarah's initial movements were slightly hesitant, her muscle memory taking time to fully reconnect with the aircraft's responses. She's rusty, Bradley observed to Morrison, who had joined him to observe the test flight. But watch how she's handling the corrections. She's not fighting the aircraft. She's relearning its personality. Within 20 minutes of flight time, Sarah's confidence had returned. The helicopter began responding to her inputs with the smooth precision that marked an experienced pilot. She ran through a series of maneuvers that tested both her skills and the aircraft's modifications, including simulated emergency procedures that would be critical if the mission encountered unexpected complications. Tower, requesting permission to practice auto-rotation procedures over the training area. Sarah's voice came through the radio with the calm professionalism that had characterized her intelligence briefings. Morrison keyed the microphone. Approved, Lieutenant. Take whatever time you need. For the next hour, Sarah put the helicopter through its paces. She practiced rapid descents, tight turns, and precision hovering that would be essential for the extraction mission. Most importantly, she familiarized herself with the aircraft's modifications, learning how the additional fuel tanks and defensive systems affected its handling characteristics. When the Black Hawk finally settled onto the landing pad, Sarah emerged from the cockpit with a satisfied expression. The helicopter had performed flawlessly, and her confidence in her ability to handle the mission had been restored. How did it feel? Morrison asked as Sarah approached the control tower. Like riding a bicycle, she replied with a slight smile. The fundamentals come back quickly. The modifications actually improve the aircraft's stability, which will be helpful in the weather conditions we're expecting. That evening's mission briefing took on a different character than the previous day's sessions. With Sarah's flight test completed successfully, the team's focus shifted from whether the mission was possible to how they would execute it flawlessly. The dynamics in the room had evolved as well. Sarah was no longer the surprising revelation, but an integral part of the team's planning process. Intelligence updates indicate increased patrol activity around the target island, Sarah began, displaying the latest satellite imagery. However, the patterns suggest routine security, rather than specific preparation for our arrival. Enemy forces appear to be following standard protocols. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez studied the patrol boat movements displayed on the screen. What's your assessment of their radar coverage? Limited, Sarah replied. Their radar systems are older generation, designed primarily for surface threats, rather than low-flying aircraft. If we maintain appropriate altitude and approach vectors, we can avoid detection until we're within 5 kilometers of the target. The mission timeline had been refined based on Sarah's flight test and the updated intelligence. The team would depart at 0300 hours, taking advantage of darkness and the gap between patrol schedules that Sarah had identified in the enemy's routine. Weather forecast has been updated as well, Sarah continued. The storm system is tracking slightly south of our route, which means we'll encounter strong winds but avoid the worst of the precipitation. Visibility should be adequate for the approach and extraction. Petty Officer Chen raised his hand. Ma'am, what happens if the weather is worse than forecasted? Do we abort or adapt? Sarah's answer reflected the careful planning that had characterized her intelligence work. We have 3 contingency plans, depending on conditions. If visibility drops below minimums, we delay for 4 hours and reassess. If winds exceed safe limits for landing, we modify the extraction to a water pickup using fast ropes. If the storm system shifts north and we encounter severe weather en route, we have alternate approach routes that add 30 minutes to flight time but avoid the worst conditions. Morrison nodded approvingly. Sarah's planning was thorough without being inflexible, accounting for the reality that combat missions rarely proceeded exactly as planned. Equipment final checks, Morrison announced, shifting the briefing to operational details. Each team member reported on their preparation status, weapons condition, and communication equipment functionality. The coordination between air and ground elements had been rehearsed extensively, with special attention to emergency procedures that might be needed if the extraction went wrong. One more thing, Sarah said, as the briefing concluded. I want everyone to understand the limitations we're working within. This helicopter can carry 6 fully equipped operators, plus crew. If we encounter casualties or need to extract additional personnel, we'll be at maximum weight capacity. That affects our performance, especially in adverse weather. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez looked up from his equipment checklist. Are you saying we might have to make difficult choices about who comes out? Sarah met his gaze directly. I'm saying that we need to plan for every possibility, including scenarios where the mission parameters change unexpectedly. My job is to get everyone home alive, but I need you all to understand the constraints I'm working within. Her directness was appreciated rather than alarming. These were operators who preferred honest assessments over optimistic projections. Knowing the limitations helped them plan their own actions accordingly. The final hours before departure were spent in individual preparation and quiet reflection. Sarah found herself in the hangar once again, conducting a final inspection of the helicopter by flashlight. Her thoroughness had impressed the maintenance crew, but she couldn't shake the awareness that tomorrow's mission would test every aspect of her skills and judgment. Petty Officer Williams approached as she completed her external inspection. Ma'am, can I ask you something personal? Sarah looked up from the tail rotor assembly she had been examining. Of course. Are you nervous about going back to operational flying? I mean, 18 months is a long time, and this isn't exactly a routine mission. Sarah considered the question carefully before answering. Every pilot gets nervous before a challenging mission, Petty Officer. The trick is channeling that nervousness into heightened awareness and careful preparation. She gestured toward the helicopter. I've done everything I can to prepare for tomorrow. Now I have to trust my training and experience. What if something goes wrong that you haven't planned for? Then I adapt and overcome, just like you do, Sarah replied simply. The fundamentals of combat flying are the same whether you're supporting ground troops in Afghanistan or extracting SEALs from a hostile island. You assess the situation, Make the best decision possible with available information, and execute with confidence. Williams nodded, his respect for Sarah's approach evident. Thank you, ma'am. I feel better knowing you're thinking about this the same way we think about our part of the mission. As midnight approached, team members began making their way to their quarters for what sleep they could manage before the 0300 departure. Sarah remained in the hangar for a few more minutes, running her hands along the helicopter's fuselage and mentally rehearsing the next day's mission profile. She had flown similar missions before, but never after such a long break from operational flying, and never with so much depending on her performance. The weight of responsibility was familiar, even comforting in a way. This was what she had trained for, what she was good at, what she had missed during her months behind a desk. Tomorrow would test whether 18 months of intelligence work had dulled her combat edge, or whether her unique combination of flying skills and analytical experience would prove to be exactly at the mission required. Either way, she was ready to find out. 0300 hours arrived with mechanical precision. The base was shrouded in pre-dawn darkness as the SEAL team made final preparations for departure. Sarah had been awake since 0230, conducting her final pre-flight inspection with the methodical thoroughness that had become her trademark. The modified Black Hawk sat ready on the tarmac, its rotors gleaming under the harsh floodlights. Captain Morrison approached as Sarah completed her external inspection. "Final intelligence update," he said, handing her a sealed envelope. "Satellite imagery from 6 hours ago shows no significant changes in enemy disposition. Weather system is tracking as forecasted. You still comfortable with the mission?" Sarah opened the envelope and quickly reviewed the latest information. "Affirmative, sir. Conditions are within acceptable parameters. We're ready to launch on schedule." The team boarded with the quiet efficiency that marked elite operators preparing for dangerous work. Each man carried specialized equipment, optimized for the mission profile, and their movements reflected careful rehearsal of procedures that would be executed in darkness under stress. Sarah watched them settle into the aircraft, noting how they secured their gear and checked their communications equipment. "Comms check," Sarah announced through the helicopter's intercom system. Each team member responded in sequence, confirming that communication systems were functioning properly. These same radios would be their lifeline during the extraction, allowing coordination between the ground team and the helicopter even under combat conditions. At exactly 0300, the Black Hawk lifted off from Naval Base Coronado and turned toward the open ocean. Sarah felt the familiar sensation of muscle memory taking over as the helicopter responded to her inputs. The 18 months of desk work seemed to fade away as she settled into the rhythm of operational flying. The flight to the target area would take 2 hours and 40 minutes, following a route that had been carefully planned to avoid commercial shipping lanes and known patrol areas. For the first hour, they flew over calm seas under clear skies, giving Sarah time to fully readjust to the aircraft's handling characteristics while loaded with fuel and personnel. "Approaching first waypoint," Sarah announced through the intercom. "Weather conditions remain favorable. Estimated time to target remains unchanged." Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, who was serving as the team's spotter, confirmed visual identification of navigation landmarks that corresponded to their planned route. The coordination between pilot and crew was developing smoothly, with each team member settling into their assigned roles. As they progressed toward the target area, weather conditions began to deteriorate as forecasted. Wind speeds increased, and visibility decreased as scattered clouds moved through their flight path. Sarah adjusted their altitude and speed to compensate, drawing on experience gained through countless hours of flying in similar conditions. "Pilot, we're picking up radio traffic from the target area," reported Petty Officer Chen, who was monitoring enemy communications. "Routine patrol check-ins. Nothing that suggests they're aware of our approach." Sarah acknowledged the report while mentally updating her tactical assessment. The enemy's lack of awareness was good news, but she knew that could change rapidly once they began their final approach to the target island. Their success would depend on maintaining stealth until the last possible moment. At the 2-hour mark, Sarah began their descent toward the target area. The island appeared on the horizon as a dark silhouette against slightly lighter sky, its defensive installations clearly visible through night vision equipment. Sarah reduced airspeed and altitude, configuring the helicopter for the precision flying that the extraction would require. Target island visual, she announced. Beginning final approach procedures. Stand by for combat operations. The transformation in the helicopter's atmosphere was immediate. The casual conversation that had marked the flight disappeared, replaced by focused concentration as each team member prepared for their specific role in the extraction. Sarah activated the aircraft's defensive systems and checked her instruments one final time. Overwatch, this is Rescue Bird. Sarah transmitted to the offshore command vessel that was providing mission support. We are 5 minutes from target. All systems green, proceeding as planned. The reply came immediately. Rescue Bird. Overwatch copies. You are cleared for extraction. Weather window remains open for 45 minutes. Sarah acknowledged and turned her attention to the final approach. The landing zone was a small concrete pad, surrounded by buildings and defensive positions. Getting in would require precise flying. Getting out with a full load would test every aspect of her skills. The SEAL team deployed with textbook efficiency, fast roping from the helicopter into the compound, while Sarah maintained a steady hover despite increasing wind conditions. Within minutes, she received confirmation that the team had secured the landing zone and was proceeding to the target building where Colonel Webb was being held. Rescue Bird, this is ground team, came Rodriguez's voice through the radio. Package secured. Moving to extraction point. Estimate 3 minutes. Sarah acknowledged while scanning the surrounding area for threats. Enemy patrol boats were visible in the distance, but they didn't appear to have detected the helicopter's presence yet. The operation was proceeding exactly as planned. Then everything changed. Rescue Bird. Be advised we have company. Rodriguez transmitted, his voice carrying new urgency. Enemy quick reaction force is mobilizing. We need immediate extraction. Sarah saw muzzle flashes from the compound's defensive positions as the enemy began responding to the SEAL team's presence. Surface-to-air missile systems that intelligence had identified were powering up, their radar signatures becoming visible on her defensive systems display. Ground team, how long until you reach the landing zone? Sarah asked while maneuvering the helicopter to avoid potential missile engagement zones. 2 minutes, but we're taking fire. The package is ambulatory but wounded. Sarah made rapid calculations based on the tactical situation developing around her. The enemy was reacting faster than intelligence had predicted, and the extraction was becoming complicated by the presence of a wounded hostage who would require assistance boarding the helicopter. Copy, ground team. I'm repositioning for hot extraction. Be prepared for immediate departure upon reaching the landing zone. What followed was the kind of precision flying that Sarah's years of combat experience had prepared her for. Despite enemy fire, deteriorating weather conditions, and the pressure of time constraints, she maneuvered the helicopter into position for an extraction that would test every aspect of her skills as a pilot. The SEAL team reached the landing zone under heavy fire, carrying Colonel Webb between them. Sarah brought the helicopter down onto the concrete pad, with the rotor disc clearing surrounding obstacles by mere feet. Enemy rounds were striking the aircraft's armored hull as the team loaded their rescued hostage and prepared for departure. Everyone aboard, Rodriguez shouted through the intercom. Get us out of here. Sarah pulled collective and applied forward cyclic, lifting the overloaded helicopter away from the compound as surface-to-air missiles tracked their departure. The flight home would require every bit of skill and experience she possessed, but the extraction had been successful. As they cleared the island's defensive perimeter and turned toward friendly waters, Sarah felt the satisfaction that came from a mission accomplished under difficult circumstances. The 18 months of intelligence work hadn't diminished her abilities as a combat pilot. If anything, her expanded understanding of mission planning and threat assessment had made her more effective than ever. Overwatch. This is Rescue Bird, she transmitted to the command vessel. Package secured. Departing target area. Estimate arrival your location in 2 hours, 30 minutes. Captain Morrison's voice came through the radio with evident satisfaction. Outstanding work, Rescue Bird. We'll be standing by for your arrival. As the modified Black Hawk flew through the pre-dawn darkness towards safety, Sarah reflected on the unexpected journey that had brought her to this moment. 2 days earlier, She had been an intelligence analyst whose combat flying experience was known to no one. Now she had successfully completed one of the most challenging extraction missions of her career, proving that skills earned through combat experience never truly disappeared. The SEAL team was already planning their next operation, discussing lessons learned and equipment modifications that could improve future missions. Sarah smiled as she listened to their professional analysis, knowing that her unique combination of flying skills and intelligence experience would make her an even more valuable team member going forward. Sometimes the most important qualifications were the ones that nobody knew you had, waiting for exactly the right moment to make the difference between mission success and failure. Today had been that moment, and Sarah Chen had proven herself worthy of the trust that Captain Morrison and his team had placed in her skills and judgment. The sun was rising over the Pacific as they approached the recovery vessel, painting the sky in brilliant colors that marked the successful conclusion of a mission that had tested everyone involved. Sarah had returned to operational flying in the most demanding way possible, and both she and her new teammates knew that this was just the beginning of what promised to be an exceptional partnership.